Hey everyone, appreciate the patience with a little bit of a hiccup technically. So we had an instance where I guess the link didn't show up on the LinkedIn page, and by the time the event starts, it wouldn't let us change it. So we've put it in the comments. If anyone did register for it and wasn't able to get into it or just left early, we always do send out a copy of our presentation or a recording of our presentation after the presentation, or within 24 to 48 hours. So you yourself, if you're hearing my voice, and anyone else who registered for this event will get a copy to or a link to our YouTube channel for the recording. So want to thank everybody for taking some time out on this Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you're at, to talk about email auditing with internal audit. So I'll go ahead and just jump right into the introductions. And today's kind of unique in that we're not just going through the presentation, but we will try to transition to an email auditing tool called Inquiry a couple of times, just to show some examples and demonstrate how this process works. So I'm excited to do that. So this is Ben Evans. I've been on all these webinars in the past. I'm president of Auditing Solutions, CPA, CCA is a background. I guess, primarily our audience in this group is skewing pretty hard on the internal audit side. My background from an accountant credential perspective, I did a master's of accountancy. I've worked at two of the big four firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers and KPMG. Have done internal audit consulting, for at least a couple of years before I got into this recovery audit realm. So definitely something I'm very interested in. And I think we're really excited to talk today about how this tool and this process that we have around email auditing can pay off for internal audit teams. But with that, I'm going to introduce Daniel and then let Jeremy introduce himself as well.
Thank you for having us. Again, my name is Daniel Berger. I'm the director of our IT group here at Auditing Solutions. Similar to Ben, I have two young kids, 4 and 6 years old. I'm a rare Arizona native. I spent roughly the last 15 years in technology in one form or another. Started off with an emphasis in kind of a software development side of things for a very large corporation, and then worked my way to Auditing Solutions. And I've been here for about the last 10 years, helping to kind of hone their IT group and build a process, so we can serve our clients the best that we possibly can. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jeremy now.
Hi everyone, I'm Jeremy Love. I've been with Auditing for not quite as long as Daniel, about 7 years now. I have a background in engineering, and right now I'm a Auditing software developer. Like Daniel, I also have two kids, a wonderful boy and a girl. I'm very excited to show you Inquiry, the little bit that we will today, because I am the primary developer of that. So I'm very happy to show you that today. Thank you.
Jeremy's baby. He's also the office champ at Mario Strikers. So he was a little too humble to tell us that, but he definitely is the best there. Well, let's go ahead and jump on email auditing within internal audit. So this is something I don't think most large organizations are utilizing and doing. So I wanted to start off with just a definition of what we're talking about. And then we're going to jump right into an example, because I'm one of those people that only learns when I can see something. So we're gonna start off with a definition, go through an example in the Inquiry tool. Jeremy's going to show us, let's come up with a problem, let's audit using this tool. And then we want to talk through what an actual email auditing program looks like when you start it up. What are the challenges? What are the benefits? And at the end here, we are Auditing Solutions, does a lot of things, but, at the heart of it, we're a recovery audit firm. And at the end of it, we'll kind of talk about how, we view recovery audit as being a really strong entry point into getting a email auditing initiative up and going. So let's start with that definition. So utilizing an email auditing tool within internal audit. An email auditing tool empowers internal audit professionals to quickly search massive amounts of electronic records to efficiently investigate existing controls and design controls around new initiatives. A simple way to put this is if an internal audit team had the ability to look at an organization's all the emails that existed within, a set period of time, maybe the last, 12 months, last 24 months, almost as if they use Google, being able to search and find anything, not just an email, but what's attached to that email in a quick and efficient manner, and had it centralized. What types of controls could an internal audit team develop around that? And it really is almost endless, right? There's endless both on the control side and also on the investigation side. So if you have an ethics tip come in through a hotline, or if you have a sexual harassment allegation and that's handed over to internal audit to investigate, having access to an email auditing engine that's been efficiently set up and built within the organization is going to allow the auditors to have visibility that they otherwise could not have. Now, we'll talk through some of the considerations on PII and items like that, but large organizations are doing this and finding it to be a very efficient way to help internal audit teams, which are already very leveraged when it comes to number of resources and the tasks that are being assigned, to be able to cover more ground, implement more controls across their entire COSO framework in a more efficient manner. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jeremy now, just to walk through a quick example before we start talking about how we would implement an email auditing process, because I think this example will help to drive home what that kind of that vague paragraph covers. So Jeremy, I'm going to go ahead and I guess we've pulled together Enron data from publicly available information, and Jeremy's going to use that Enron data to show you what we can do here.
Yep. All right, so this is inquiry, and we see here in front of us the query builder. I won't go too much into the depths of the features that this tool has. I'll keep it very high level, just enough to kind of give you that brief demonstration. All right, so let's say we want an investigative example. Say we know something about one of our vendors. In this case, we're going to talk about Alcoa. So I'm going to change this real quick because we already had this up. So generally means anything within a message or an attachment. So let's say we want generally contains, this vendor is called Alcoa. Alcoa. All right. And we'll say this is Enron again. So this is the message set back from 2000 roughly from all of their public scandal. It's publicly available. That's why we're using it as a demonstration to today. A little bit more background. This particular data set has roughly 500,000 records. And we're going to search through it, as you'll see, in the blink of an eye. So we're going to say message received date. We're going to say somewhere in 2002. 12/31/2002. And we'll see here that that gives us 42 results. If that's just a brief overview of the number of results, we can click here to actually perform the query. And we can see after a moment, 42 results. And we can see that we just searched that 500,000 records in, I don't know, a second. So very, very fast. Maybe 42 results is a bit too much. We can click through this result set here on the left. We can have the message pull up on the right, just very briefly, subject, metadata, the attachments here, the actual message here, so we can go through and look through those. Maybe that wasn't quite specific enough. Let's say we know that we are looking for a record that contains, I'm gonna add a new row, contains threshold amount. So we do that, we see one result. That's the exact result we're looking for. We can click query here. We can see that one result. We can see this was an amendment to Enron Capital. So let's go ahead and open that up. We'll say that's the exact record that we want. Let's say we open it up a few times. I'm going to pull this up here. And there we go. We can see this. It's the exact record we're looking at. Amendment. Here's threshold amount. Perfect. All right. Let's pivot a little bit. Let's say we want to search for something, the ISDA master agreement. So we can say that this is something else maybe that catches our eye and interest, something else we want to investigate. Let's pull that out and pivot towards those for a moment. So ISDA and master agreement, we're going to go back. We're going to do a new query. We're going to start over. We're going to say we only want to pull open the attachments in this case, though. So we're going to say the attachment content contains ISDA, and the attachment content contains master agreement. And we can see here we have 2,725 results. That's a lot of results. Let's go ahead and query for it anyways, just to give a brief overview. Maybe this is something that, again, catches your eye and something you want to dive more into. You can start just going through, seeing this high-level overview. I hope that this kind of provides a very brief introduction about what's possible with email auditing, at least in terms of an investigative role.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I mean, so, in this example, he just went through, what I would think, would lead to running those types of queries is, if you were aware or being told that, hey, these threshold amounts were removed from the contract, whether that's by a specific supplier or a member of procurement who's concerned that the supplier is saying there was a removal of the threshold. You can then quickly be able to use this tool, which essentially, like I said, is it's almost like a Google for all of the emails that exist within the organization. You may not know who within your organization initially contracted with that party. You may not know who would have made the actual changes to the contract. And you may also be looking for whether or not this type of a contractual removal where you're removing a threshold actually was signed and executed. In all those cases, you're going to be able to, just as Jeremy showed, you're going to be able to pull up that document. You're going to be able to go through that document, and you're going to be able to search around it and be able to find other items that are within that email chain to be able to find out whether or not that specific event occurred. So moving back into kind of a more general discussion here, what does it look like when we implement, that Jeremy's already loaded it up, got all the Enron data in there. How do we get there? How do we get to the point where you can just, without just taking Enron's data file and uploading it in, what does that look like in an organization? Well, the first step that we've identified here is what we call scope mapping. So if within your internal audit team, you want to look at doing email auditing, one of the first things you're going to have to look at is, well, what controls do you want to have in scope? You could theoretically have almost any range of controls or all range of controls in scope, or you could limit it to certain areas. Are you wanting to look at things that, surround ethics, that surround foreign governments, items around how things are being billed, financial reporting, really anything in that COSO cube that you want to look at, you can identify and say, okay, this would be in scope. Obviously, the larger the scope that you have, the more data and documentation is going to have to be collected to be loaded into your email auditing tool. Once you've gotten that first step done and you've identified what the scope is, you're going to have to look at what the reach is needed for investigative purposes. So where I'm talking about scope on step one, we're talking about controls that are established, that are being run regularly, either quarterly, weekly, monthly, annually. Number two would be, what types of activities do we think we would want to have access to for investigative purposes? The most easiest example here would be an ethics line, right? A whistleblower's line. Is that something we want to have the type of reach within the data that we're collecting so that when those tips come in, we can immediately research emails to see what type of, corroborating evidence or what breadcrumbs there are out there. Once we've identified those two, we can start to map all the roles and the corresponding individuals that fall under the scope. And that's really what we're trying to get at throughout this entire phase, right? Is whose emails do we need to collect at the organization, and what's the justification for collecting those emails? That leads right into phase two. And probably the first, if you're not familiar with email auditing with an internal audit, probably your first question, well, as I collect this information, some of that's going to include PII. Some of that's going to include things that might be confidential or sensitive within the organization. So in step two, as you're looking at the actual email and documentation collection, what you're going to be doing is looking at, how are we going to make sure that as the data is collected, it's also cleaned of any PII. So if I'm in the collection as one of the email accounts and I'm sending my home address, or I have, for whatever strange reason, my credit card in one of my email, chains. We don't want that to be brought into our email search engine. And so we're going to have to, through the course of collection, have individuals that are going through and making sure that scripts are written to redact or X out that information. Once we're comfortable that we have a good strategy for making sure personal information is not being collected where not necessary, we can start to move to the initial bulk collection process. There's really two steps of collection, or two types of collection we do. Initially, when you're starting a new email auditing program, you're having to collect everything, for, I don't know, X number of years back, depending on what your scope is. Let's say it's 2 years, right? So you're gonna have to go collect everything that exists in the scope that we identified in phase 1, and you're going to have to do that through bulk processes where you're loading full, OST, PST type files into the system. Once that initial implementation is done, there's multiple ways that I think email forwarding is one of the simplest to continue to collect incremental data, to continue to collect emails as they move forward, so that the internal audit team has a current view of what correspondence is taking place and has access to it. The third phase is the actual program initiation. So once you've determined what the scope of the engagement is, whose emails we're going to be collecting, and then you go through the effort of actually collecting it, setting up a mechanism so that it will continue to collect, you want to figure out how you're going to use it. Well, one of the first items is going to be the creation and assignment of roles and controls. So within the internal audit team, if you're going to be using this email auditing tool as a mechanism to create new controls to address risks that exist in your environment, you're going to look to identify, okay, well, what controls, what searches do we want to be running? What frequency do we want those searches to be occurring in? Quarterly, weekly, annually, monthly, and who's going to be in charge of making sure that those things are properly run and documented. And what does the documentation look like as we gather the information to see, if we're looking at something around money laundering, who's in charge of the queries that we're going to run, and what are they going to pull and document in relation to finding out whether or not we see any signs or evidence of money laundering activities taking place in correspondence that's occurring. As this is happening, individuals will be able to build a query library. They'll be able to share queries across internal audit teams, so people aren't stuck reinventing the wheel over and over again. As this query library grows, I might be able to create a query that's able to identify some specific instances of money laundering. I can share that with other members of my team. I can use it to delegate. They can pull those already pre-made queries up, and I can assign tasks as an internal audit manager, as an internal audit director, down so that those queries are happening regularly and can be happening across different departments based on different scope of work. The third point, as we talked about before, in addition to using an email auditing tool for controls purposes, we can use it for investigative purposes, and having strict guidelines on how that's supposed to work as well. Again, tied often into hotlines, tips, specific organizations submit a concern that they want internal audit to look into. Having set policies and guidelines for internal auditors on how those things are investigated, who has access to what. There are certain issues that might be sensitive that you might want to hold at a higher level within your audit team, around maybe executive investigations, where other items might be more day-to-day and can be handled by, entry level or senior internal auditors. But having that defined process is another part of implementing a large scale email auditing program. I think the big takeaway that we had as we kind of sat down, so when we built this tool on our side, and we don't have the only email auditing tool, we should have the best one, but if when we built this tool on our side, it was built for recovery audit, right? And we'll talk about how it's used in a recovery audit context in a second. But as we looked at how it would be used across other groups, other functions within an organization, the thing that became really clear is that this is a pretty big undertaking. So I think it's a huge get for an internal audit department to be able to have access and be able to use this to create controls and do investigations. Probably one of the most powerful tools you could have to investigate things without having to, pull people into interviews and start, pulling documents and seizing computers. It's very powerful, but it's also a huge undertaking. Getting just internally, getting the scope and the breadth of gathering this information, making sure that privacy considerations are taken into account, can be quite a project. And so as we were talking about this, actually Daniel, Jeremy, and I primarily, we talked about, well, how could an organization kind of get the ball rolling without having to go from zero to a fully functioning email auditing tool that can be used within a internal audit department. And obviously we're going to fall back on the recovery audit process, because that's really what led us to the development of this. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what a recovery audit is, which may be a good portion of our audience today in internal audit. So a recovery audit is, you have the risk that your suppliers, your vendors are overbilling you. That's one of the risks that's in your framework right now, right? A recovery audit is a control that is run at an organization where essentially you have auditors review and look at your actual billings, your actual payments, and look for instances in which overpayments have occurred, and then remediate them. So remediate and prevent, look to identify overbillings, bring those dollars back in, and then ultimately prevent future overpayments from happening in the future. Because the scope of a recovery audit is so much smaller than a full-on implementation of an email auditing program within an organization, it's normally easier to start there. So the implementation of a recovery audit scope to start an email audit program provides immediate hard dollar results from the initiative. So that's one big factor. If you start a recovery audit, you can bring in actual dollars very quickly, which is something tangible, something easy to measure, and shows the value of the program. Additionally, and this is down below, it's self-funded, right? So by performing a recovery audit and beginning to implement that email tool in that scope, you are going to end up with net dollars. You're going to end up, if you're using a third-party firm, you're going to recover, $500,000, pay out some commission, and the vast majority of those dollars are going to be kept within your organization and can be used to grow out the email auditing program and to fund other tools and initiatives within the internal audit group. Another benefit for using a recovery audit to start the process of moving towards having an email auditing program within an organization is the time burden being shifted from your organization to a third party. Like I said before, I don't think I've spoken to an internal audit team that's overstaffed, especially in the last couple of years. I think we've seen a lot of internal audit directors and vice presidents being asked to do more with a lot less resources. By performing a third-party recovery audit, you're able to shift that burden over to a recovery audit firm that works on contingency that you don't have to assign any budget for, which is the third point here. So traditionally, again, for those who aren't familiar with recovery audit, you engage a recovery audit firm. They'll gather some basic information, and one of those pieces of information, a big key, will be to do a mass gathering of email so that they can look for instances in which suppliers are overbilling. And at the end of that, you've got at least a core of a email auditing program started, and you can look to move into other risks aside from vendor compliance with pricing and billing practices. I did ask Daniel to walk through one more example just to kind of drive home what a recovery audit would look like, type search would look like on the Enron environment. So I'm going to just escape out of here real quick and open back up inquiry and have Daniel walk through this example.
Definitely. Thank you, Ben. So very generally speaking, when it comes to a recovery-based audit, each organization has their own unique kind of processes in place, right? So each organization has, let's say, an approval process is kind of the example we're going to work through for a given contract. So the example that I have here is something where we've already performed the investigation. We know what those emails are going to look like. And now we've developed a control that's in place to actually go back and validate and investigate it again at a future time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a saved query for this instance. So I'm going to go into our shared queries. As you can see here, I have a query that was just developed for this instance with Enron. And this is just a really simple example to show, we do have a control here in place where we know that within Enron, they have a message subject that contains the text contract request approval for request. And contained within that, they generally have a contract that's literally called contract.txt, or they have an appendix to a contract, which is called appendix.txt. So we developed a query around this control. So let's just go ahead and run that at the moment. So I'm going to click on this. This is going to show me a very specific subset of records now that, again, it contains the message subject, as you can see here, contract request approval for request. This is their contract or request number, and also the stage it's at within the routing process. As we click through a couple of these, you can also see they specifically contain the attachment that we're looking for with either contract.txt or appendix.txt. So what we do in this instance is just a step of validation. If we're talking Audit Solutions is auditing Enron at the moment, or Enron is auditing contracts for itself, you basically go through these different record sets because we know that these are all kind of what we're looking for at the moment. And what I'm just going to look for at the moment is total discount down here in the message body. So I'm going to search through a little bit. And let's see if we could find a record that has a high dollar value. All right, so here's one example. So this particular contract, throughout the routing process, they do have a field in here or a subsection that's talking about the total discount. This total discount is for $354,246. As you can see, there's a little bit more information up here on the top about what it's about. It's a non-standard approval. It's a new incremental deal for US Steel. So that just tells us that, this specific contract is going through an approval process, and you can see there's a fairly significant amount of money that's at stake here at the moment. So what we could do at this point, if we have an internal ERP system, we could then go to this specific vendor and look to see where those funds collected. For Audit Solutions, if we're talking about a post-audit group, we would then go search the data that was provided to us. We would look to see, were these funds recouped at some point? If they weren't, then we're going to bring it to our client's attention, and we're going to make sure that that money is recouped and you're made whole. As we're going through this a little bit more, again, you can see various other examples, different routing notes on here as it's going through different stages of the process. And on some of these, you'll actually see, there was, here it was approved, but then here, so it's disapproved at first, I'm sorry, but then route number 2, it was approved. So if we really wanted to, we could take this a step further and say, okay, these are approval for a request. But if we want to add one more step to this, we can also generally say we want to find something where it says approved within it. So that gives me a smaller subset of data now. Where now, if I don't want to take my time going through 200 records, 2000 records, whatever it may be, we can see they actually do use common language in here now where it's saying these are specifically approved. So this gives me a smaller subset of data to validate my control. So that is a very general high level of kind of how we utilize it within Audit Solutions. And that we definitely see, Enron could be using this for their specific data as well. And this is something that we see across all, this isn't Enron specific. This is something we see across every one of our clients that we currently work with. And honestly, it's generally, there's really solid controls that are in place with all of our large clients. Sometimes it's something as simple as an email was sent, negotiation was completed, it was sent to another group to actually implement. And unfortunately, maybe that individual that was going to implement this into the ERP system was out of town. they got back in town a week later, they got through their inbox and they missed that email. It's very, very common for these types of issues to occur. And, one minor oversight like that could lead to, as we saw before, $350,000 in oversight. Yeah, that's a general, very, very high level overview. I'm going to go ahead and give it back to Ben now, or maybe he wants to add a little bit more color around that. But
no, I think that's a perfect example of what we, one of the 100 things they look at when we're doing a recovery audit using the email auditing tool. I do just want to bring it back to maybe the takeaways here. Let me see if I can pull up our presentation. We're not super good at toggling here because we are not used to doing it in these presentations. So, simple functionality there. So just to kind of, as a key takeaway at the end of this, what we really want individuals who are coming on this call to know is this is something, we're doing this at multiple, Fortune 500 level clients that we have right now, implementing this type of a program. And it's something that's out there and really can help you to grow your control framework in a leveraged way, right? You can cover a lot of controls if you have the right emails collected and loaded, and you can do it with a very low amount of labor once it's implemented. I hope coming across is that it is quite an effort to implement it, and that will take some time, some effort, some approval, and generally sway to get done within an organization. And that is often why we don't see it at some of our other clients is that hurdle to get it implemented is too high. Even though the benefit really is there at the back end. Where we have seen it be successful and get implemented is when it first comes in through the recovery audit process, because it's self-funded, because it's bringing dollars in that wouldn't be coming into the organization otherwise. And because in the course of performing that audit work, third-party audit firm has essentially set up an entire framework and gathered quite a bit of emails already into the system. That point, those clients are able to turn it over and start bringing it into other departments and into other control areas outside of just accuracy of vendor payments, accuracy of, contracts with vendors. Again, we always look to have these presentations not be sales pitches. So we're not looking to talk specifically about how our tool works in this environment. You could manually do an email auditing program across OST or PST files. It would just be extremely inefficient, and it wouldn't be worth the time that's in there. And but if any of you do ever have more questions, whether you're interested in learning more about Auditech's services on the recovery audit side, on implementing a tool like this within your environment, or just questions on how you would want to do it within your own organization, feel free to reach out to myself, Daniel, Jeremy. LinkedIn is normally the best method. We'd love to kind of help you to see at least what we've seen work in other places. And whether or not you work with us, let you know some of the benefits, but also some of the pitfalls and rocks you might want to avoid throughout the process. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming to this call. We actually got a pretty decent group considering I didn't set up the LinkedIn meeting correctly. So I'm pretty happy with that. But if you did come in late, you probably came on time and then you left because it wasn't set up correctly. I will be sending the entire recording out either today or Monday on our YouTube channel. You'll also be able to see all the rest of the online events we've done on our YouTube channel there as well. Not all of them will apply to an internal audit group, which I think is the majority of the group on this call, but some might be useful. And definitely if you're kind of new to the concept of what a recovery audit is and like to learn more about that, that YouTube channel will be useful there as well. So again, thanks everyone for coming on this Friday morning / afternoon, and hope you all have a great weekend. Bye.